Call our meeting of the Joint Citizens and Legislative Committee on Children to order. And if we could, would like to ask if we could join in prayer before we start. If you would bow your heads. Our kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for letting us meet today and talk about our children and their safety and well-being. And today would especially like to remember the family and friends of Sean Reeves, who passed away this week. He dedicated his legal career to advocating for the welfare and safety of children at DSS and beyond, and he made a lifelong difference for them in the short time he was here. Dear Lord, we ask that you look over his family and take care of them and bless them. And now we ask that you watch over this meeting, and we ask that you make it a productive meeting and look over the welfare and safety of all the children in South Carolina. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, we're doing things a little different today. We have people here, we have people there. So we're going to we're going to let you go around and introduce yourselves, members of the committee, and we'll start with those that are actually live here, and then we'll kind of go to those virtual people, some that I can see and some that I can see part of you. We'll start on over here and let you introduce yourself. And can y'all all hear us out there in virtual land? Just shake your head. Give us, okay, that's good. Okay.
Hey y'all, my name is Taylor Seal. I'm with the State Department of Education in the Office of Early Learning and Literacy, and I'm here to support Quincy Moore.
Good afternoon. My name is Quincy Moore. I work with Dr. Mathis in the College and Career Readiness Division. I'm the Director of Early Learning and Literacy at the department.
I'm Dr. Kay Phillips, and I am one of the citizen members of the Joint Citizen Legislation Committee on Children, and I'm also one of the 17 CAC directors in the state.
And I'm Senator Brad Hutto from Orangeburg. I represent District 40.
Mike Leach, Department of Social Services, State Director.
Reeves McLeod, Legislative Liaison for the Department of Juvenile Justice.
Neil Collins, Representative for District 5.
Now we're going to go to our virtual people, and okay, if y'all can introduce yourselves online. I think, do we have them unmuted so they can introduce themselves? Okay. Somebody.
Titus Liggett with HHS.
Somebody want to jump in there? Let me tell you, this is more difficult for me than you realize, trying to figure out who's going to talk next. Just jump in there, somebody. I see Conley. Is Conley Ann up there, somebody?
Hey guys, it's Conley Ann Ragley with the Department of Social Services.
Okay.
Ms. Chairman, this is Representative Beth Bernstein, and I am calling in virtually. I can't see y'all. Am I supposed to be able to see you?
I can see your mouth. There you are. Now I can see the rest of you. Okay.
I'm gonna get up. Okay.
Okay. Now that's better. Okay. Now let's see.
My name is Amanda Whittle with the Department of Children's Advocacy.
Okay. There's Amanda. I see her.
Good afternoon, Freddie Pugh, State Director, Department of Juvenile Justice.
Okay. Who else do we have on there? I know there's more people out there because I saw more faces a while ago.
I don't know if you heard me, but this is Pete Liggett with the South Carolina Department of Health and Human Services.
Okay.
This is Jennifer Buster. Sorry. Jennifer Buster, also from the Department of Health and Human Services.
Okay.
Amber Gillum, Department of Social Services.
Becky Davis, the Department of Education, Office of Exceptional Children Special Services.
Mary Poole, the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs, State Director.
Okay. Do we have any? Go ahead.
Louise Johnson, Department of Mental Health, Children's Services.
Good afternoon. This is Rick Caldwell with South Carolina DHEC.
Okay.
Debbie Blaylock, Deputy Director, Department of Mental Health, Community Mental Health Services.
Is that everybody? Did we get everybody? I don't know. Okay, I'm going to pretend we did. How about that? Are we going to go ahead with our? Okay, we're going to go ahead with our agenda now. So first up, we have the Department of Children's Advocacy. If we can pull up on the screen Amanda Whittle with the Department of Children's Advocacy, and Amanda's going to give us her report. Let's see if we can get Amanda. That's not Amanda. I will know her when I see her. That's her. That one. Let's see. The AW there. Can we get her?
Hey, Amanda, you want to double check your video and your audio and share your screen when you're ready. Amanda, can you hear me?
Amanda, are you out there?
We can go ahead and
Okay, well, we're going to go right on to, is Jennifer?
She's there. She appears to be muted. Now she's not.
There we go.
Okay, Amanda, are you out there? No, that's not Amanda.
I am.
Okay, well.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Okay. That's not Amanda's picture.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
We can hear you, so you can start talking and maybe we'll see you in a minute.
Perfect. Hopefully you can see my slideshow.
There you go.
We have your picture, so why don't you talk to us and maybe we'll see a slideshow in a minute.
Okay. Chairman Shealy and members of the Joint Citizens and Legislative Committee on Children, thank you for your service to the children of our state, and thank you for the opportunity to address you today as South Carolina State Child Advocate and as Director of the Department of Children's Advocacy. I also want to thank you, Senator Shealy, for remembering Sean Reeves. He was one of my former co-workers, and I would call him friend, and appreciate your support and acknowledgement for his service. When the Department of Children's Advocacy launched on July 1, 2019, DCA's Communication Director and I tackled our first orders of business to create and publish an agency website, to establish a toll-free number for the receipt of complaints and concerns about services provided to children by certain state agencies, and to reach out to the 9 child-serving agencies to introduce ourselves and to provide them with information to add our contact information in a conspicuous place on their websites. All 9 agencies did that. This is a list of those 9 agencies. I wonder if you're able to see that at this time.
No, so just keep talking to us.
Okay. So regarding agency operations, if you were able to see the slide, you would see that there is a very large sandwich on this slide that's about 1 mile high, and it has many different ingredients and things on it, and it's absolutely a mess. So what I knew when we first started out with the Department of Children's Advocacy was that the first 90 days would just be a huge effort to determine kind of what went where. And so we knew that it would be necessary to deconstruct the statutory obligations for the new agency to reveal sort of separate entrees. One, that of the state director position, which included program operations such as staff retention, budget, employee relations, process improvement, technology, hiring, onboarding, policies, office space, and equipment. And then another entree, so to speak, that detailed what the obligations would be for the state child advocate, which include ensuring timely, safe, and effective services for children, examining on a system-wide basis the services that are provided to children, receiving complaints regarding services provided by state agencies, and the many others that are in 63-11-1930, 2270, and 2280. I am delighted to share with you that once all of that was deconstructed and it was time to rebuild, it was a true pleasure to create this organizational structure. And I'm so pleased with the additions that we've been able to make to this wonderful team, which include 2 deputy child advocates, one for that sort of first part of deputy child advocate of program operations, and the other for this newer part, a deputy child advocate for investigations. And you still can't see my slide, is that right?
That's correct. We can't see your slides. What you're going to have to do is send us a copy of this slide packet, I think. But I just want you to know I'm not in charge of Zoom because I don't do this very well. So this is not, has nothing to do with the chairman here. So.
Okay. So regarding operations, the Department of Children's Advocacy team consists of staff and volunteers who are physically located throughout the state. The DCA, or Deputy Child Advocate of Operations, oversees the 3 statutory divisions that have existed since the 1970s and 1980s, and which became part of the Department of Children's Advocacy effective July 1, 2019. So DCA consists of 180 full-time employees, 200 legislatively appointed foster care review board state and local board members, and about 1,780 volunteer guardians ad litem. DCA staff are located in a centralized state office, as well as 4 regional and 28 county guardian ad litem offices and 4 regional and 14 county continuum of care offices. And the Department of Children's Advocacy is responsible for administering these 3 divisions, which are the Continuum of Care, Foster Care Review Board, and the Cass Elias McCarter Guardian Ad Litem Program. I want to share with you summaries and highlights of those divisions. The Continuum of Care serves children with serious emotional and behavioral issues whose families need help keeping them in their home, school, or community. Continuum of Care uses a high-fidelity wraparound to provide evidence-based intensive care coordination for children and families. COC is the only state agency in South Carolina which provides high-fidelity wraparound as part of the system of care. And it incorporates an assessment to measure outcomes, which is probably my favorite part of Continuum of Care, just this idea that that it is outcome-based and has a measurable assessment process that's built into the high-fidelity process. So Continuum of Care currently uses a functional assessment score called CAFAS to measure how children are doing. This particular slide that I have in front of me shows what the baseline scores were for the 4 regions in the state, and it shows a baseline of 140, and then shows that when the children are tested again, their CAFAS scores are significantly reduced. Now, those CAFAS scores measure how children function in their daily life in an effort to assess the impairment of children and adolescents who have or at risk for emotional, behavioral, substance abuse, psychiatric, or psychological problems. This is so significant because as those scores are so high, that indicates that these are children who are at risk for being in a psychiatric residential treatment facility or being placed in the Department of Social Services foster care system, or perhaps entering the juvenile justice system, which is what we don't want. So the efficacy of the Continuum of Care program has been a highlight of this job for me. The Foster Care Review Board began in 1974 and South Carolina was the first state to enact a Foster Care Review Board to review the permanency of children in foster care. The Heart Gallery is part of the Foster Care Review Board, and the Heart Gallery takes photos of legally free children to create photo exhibits and share information for the recruitment of adoptive families. So Foster Care Review Board has staff at a state office in addition to 200 volunteers. In fiscal year 2019, they reviewed almost 10,000 children with about 7,000 case reviews, and Heart Gallery photographed 142 children and had 2,365 inquiries, and 80 children were matched with families. All of this information about the Foster Care Review Board is compiled in an annual report, which is published by the Foster Care Review Board. The Cass Elias McCarter Guardian Ad Litem program was named after Cass Elias McCarter, who started the first Guardian Ad Litem programs in South Carolina. Guardian Ad Litem programs are in 45 of our 46 counties and are responsible for assigning a Guardian Ad Litem, or a court-appointed special advocate, to each child who is involved in a DSS abuse and neglect family court case. The model anticipates that all guardians would be volunteers. However, we do not have enough volunteers to serve as guardians for abused and neglected children. So what has happened over a course of time is that staff who are supposed to be responsible for recruiting, supervising, supporting, and coaching volunteers actually have a caseload of their own. So as of July 1, 2019, about 6,000 children had a volunteer guardian ad litem, but about 3,000 children had a staff guardian ad litem. And so what that means is that those staff members are just completely unable to dedicate the amount of time that they need to recruit, supervise, support, and coach volunteers. So there had to be a give and take there. So one of our early initiatives was to just simply hire more staff so that we would be able to deal with the caseload of being guardians for children and also recruit volunteers. So this particular slide that I have in front of me shows that as of July 1, 2019, the Guardian Ad Litem program had a staff vacancy of about 40%. So we knew that we had to do something pretty creative to help them with that capacity. We created temporary hourly positions in some of particularly in Greenville County. We created peer support models for those volunteers, and we were able to increase our staff capacity from 85 in July of 2019 to 111 on June 30, 2020. So there have been other highlights as well in the role of agency director, if you will, agency director program operation highlights. Again, I was able to identify and hire a deputy child advocate for program operations, and she has been invaluable. She and I spend hours on the phone each week talking about onboarding, hiring, employee relations issues, budget. Of late, we spend a great deal of time talking about PPE and COVID-19 responses, but we also were able to negotiate with the Department of Health and Human Services regarding the Palmetto Coordinated System of Care 1915C Medicaid waiver, which will identify Continuum of Care as the provider for high-fidelity wraparound services for youth with serious and emotional and behavioral needs, with a goal of providing a sustainable reimbursement amount for Continuum of Care. We also hired a foster care review board attorney after there had been a 16-month vacancy in that position. She's hit the ground running and has been very helpful, particularly with trying to create a redesign of the practice that the Foster Care Review Board has used over the past 40 years for in-person reviews of cases. We need to rethink that and work out something that doesn't have so many people in the same room and traveling all over the state. We have also been able to meet and work with Guardian Ad Litem staff and volunteers. I'm certain as many of you in the room and on the computer have heard that many people have recommendations. And so it's been exciting to not only hear those recommendations, but to put those suggestions into action. So again, we had the peer coaching pilot project in Greenville, which was helpful. That staff, for example, supposed to have 11 people working in the Greenville Guardian office. We only had 2. And so we knew that in the time that it was going to take to hire, to advertise for that position, recruit and hire the right folks for those positions, we needed people there in the meantime to be doing some work until we could onboard those staff. We also obtained a $72,000 media grant to provide staff support, including recruitment and retention of volunteers. Part of this process, too, was trying to understand the hiring process and where things kind of get bogged down with HR. And so it was exciting to identify 2 talented and hardworking individuals who actually work with Continuum of Care, doing some administrative duties, and to sort of ask them to do a little more, and they agreed to do it. They agreed to help Guardian Ad Litem streamline the hiring and onboarding process for Guardian staff. I had heard terrible stories about how long it took between when positions were posted and when people actually walked in the door to get their ID badge. And I just thought, well, we're losing people before we can get them started. The organizational structure, the mission and vision statements, accountability, goals and measurements, budget, contract negotiation, HR, technology, and training, all those have been part of program operations this first year, as well as, again, the COVID-19 responses, including telecommuting policies and modification of business practices. And I want to give a big shout out to the Department of Administration's shared services teams. We share services with HR, procurement, IT, finance, legal, and budget, and they have been invaluable. So again, regarding this other part of the role of state child advocate, we knew immediately that we needed somebody to answer that telephone. I recall meeting with Senator Shealy a year ago, and she asked me, what would I do? Week one, what would I do? And I said, I want that telephone ringing. So it did ring, but somebody needed to answer it. So we had somebody from the Department of Administration who answered the calls, and when she was able to make a referral, she did. But if she was not able to make a referral to another agency, she transferred those calls to me. So from July 1 until November, I responded to over 500 phone calls, just everything from a complaint to a concern, and then was very happy to be able to hire 2 full-time investigators and started to really undergo the capacity building process for the investigations unit. So highlights of the investigations unit were, first off, just collaborating with the Department of Social Services. The statute allowed us to have full access to their electronic records, and I met with Director Leach, and he said, "You got it. What can we do to help?" So sitting down with him and his team and determining what that would look like, what the protocol would look like, how we would monitor to make certain that we weren't looking at cases we weren't supposed to, how much that would cost, what the support would look like, and that could not have been a finer process. So I appreciate all of his help. And then, of course, the identification and hiring of a deputy child advocate for investigations, whose contributions have been and continue to be just absolutely critical to this work. And again, for investigation unit highlights, we did then develop critical incident reporting protocols with the Department of Juvenile Justice and the Department of Social Services. We've worked closely with other agencies, particularly DSS in light of the Families First Prevention Services Act, and DJJ in light of some system improvements that they're working on to help create a service array resource library. We have partnered with them, and the Deputy Child Advocate of Investigations has really been in the trenches with them, trying to determine who is still in that service array and how we can capture that information and share it with the public. And then, of course, receipt of referrals from the Office of Inspector General. We've gotten referrals from his office in addition to online submission and telephone calls. We've again been engaged with DJJ regarding systems improvement, identification, and solution strategies, as well as a partnership with the Department of Administration to use Intranet Quorum, which is also IQ, for a complaint and caller documentation. At some point, we felt like that system was just a way to enter information, but it really could not give us reportable, extractable information that we could share with this committee, for example. I'm certain you would love to know exactly how many phone calls we've received about DSS, how many have been about child support, how many have been about DDSN, how many have been about a particular issue with DDSN. This particular system, as we knew it, we were not able to do that. So what we tried to do was hand count that information. But as you can imagine, what each person considers the issue it's not always the same. So we got a bid for a new system, and that bid was about $60,000, which is a lot of money to me. So we went back and negotiated with IQ, and last week we were able to work out a modification to the existing fields that we have to capture and report issues, and for just a nominal amount. And so we are so excited about capturing that information to be able to report those issues to the agency sort of in real time, and to be able to continue to build a real network of relationships and contacts with other agencies and organizations to strengthen service accessibility for the public. So I knew that we had to not only just have those program operations, if you will, for the 3 divisions, as well as build the investigations unit, but also this idea of a broad vision of reform, educating the public about this agency as well as other agencies, and then making recommendations for improvement would require not only just these internal findings and observations, but also external conversations with nonprofit organizations, task force, coalitions, legislature, executive, judicial, hearing youth voice, and then, of course, the State Child Fatality Committee. So I have visited with young men and women at the Department of Juvenile Justice with Senator Katrina Shealy. I've become a member of the Suicide Prevention Coalition, a member of the DHHS Medical Care Advisory Committee, a member of the Bench Bar Committee and the Court Time Work Group Subcommittee. I have become the chair of the Joint Council on Children and Adolescents, which is a council that consists of child-serving agency heads and other members of the community who serve children. The Governor's Juvenile Justice Advisory Committee, the South Carolina Behavioral Health Coalition, the Governor's Children's Justice Act Task Force, the Lieutenant Governor's Complete Count Committee, the DSS Advisory Committee, and the DJJ System Improvement Committee. And as part of the education and awareness efforts of the State Child Advocate, I have presented and provided trainings for the University of South Carolina School of Law just in this past year. I have provided trainings for the University of South Carolina School of Law, the Children's Justice Act Task Force, the Anderson County Legislative Delegation, the Office of Indigent Defense, the Sand River Women's Club, the Palmetto Association of Children and Families, media, press conferences and interviews, the Sisters of Charity, Kinship Caregiver Council, Metro Rotary, and various other organizations. But some of the more exciting and more recent initiatives have been discussions with DAODAS Director Sarah Goldsby about a DCA leadership training that she will organize with her experts about substance abuse to inform my leadership team about some of the aspects of prevention, treatment, and recovery, as well as joint training initiatives that Director Mike Leach and I have discussed with his regional staff, as well as my regional guardian ad litem staff, and then joint trainings with DSS case managers and attorneys, Office of Indigent Defense parents attorneys, and Children's Law Center regarding pre-merits hearing conferences. The idea of those is to gather and discuss cases prior to court hearings to try to move court cases and avoid continuances. I was invited to present at the Family Court Judges Annual Judicial Conference, and unfortunately that was canceled, but I'm still hopeful that there will be opportunities to share some of these initiatives and plans with the judicial branch. And then as far as listening and learning, of course, been to town hall meetings. I saw most of you at the Joint Citizens and Legislative Committee statewide hearings. I've attended Raise the Age legislative hearings, and have advocated for funding and for services for the South Carolina Network of Children's Advocacy Centers, as well as DSS legislative oversight hearings, and as recently as yesterday, talked with the Department of Mental Health, Louise Johnson, and today with the Department of Social Services Office of General Counsel about the idea of bringing safe baby courts to South Carolina through a possible grant that that some folks are working on with 0 to 3. COVID-19 brought about some big changes with everyone. I had not been familiar really with, I'm not a super tweeter, but I created a Twitter account for the agency as well as a Facebook page. That's been a wonderful way to try to connect with, stay connected with the community that I'm not able to really see. And it's been a wonderful way to share information with my staff as well. And in addition to that, we created a newsletter. Every week I think, well, there just won't be that much to report. It's just been amazing how many child welfare issues exist just week after week. So we're going into our third month of that now. So in looking ahead, I have 3 sort of buckets for looking ahead. And the first is program operations. In looking ahead for program operations, we are hopeful to have continuum of care budget sustainability to continue serving youth. I think continuum of care is a valuable resource in our state. And I love the outcome measures that come with that. We are also hoping to see guardian ad litem volunteer staff recruitment, training, retention, and support improve, as we know that we need folks who are dedicated to making recommendations to children to help them get out of foster care and be back in safe homes. And then with the Foster Care Review Board, this idea of research and application regarding the efficacy of that program and improvements for foster care children's reviews and outcomes, and then joint trainings with other agencies and continued agency leadership initiatives regarding improving outcomes. There is, without a doubt, there is not one agency that represents the system. We are all the system. And so it's imperative that we all work together and partner to the extent that we can to improve outcomes for children. That second bucket is investigations. And we need to improve, and we will improve, our data collection and interpretation. so that we can share information through regular meetings with child serving agencies regarding systemic improvement, as well as, again, this inventory and publication of a comprehensive resource list. Now, a broad vision for reform. This is a 6-year appointment for me, and I'm finishing year 1. So it'll be interesting to see where we are at the end of year 6. But I've been giving this a great deal of thought for longer than since I started this job, and I have 3 of those. One is this: joint trainings and meetings to promote access and awareness of an array of services that allow children to safely remain in their homes and communities, or in the least restrictive, most family-like setting based upon their needs. And then number 2, a coordination of services and efforts for a system of care that's grounded in urgency, empathy, and sustainability. And number 3, continued collaboration with child welfare partners regarding communication, service coordination, and planning strategies to improve the timeliness of court hearings and outcomes for children. This next slide, if you could see it, I think you would smile. I had a big picture of this huge, crazy-looking sandwich when we first started, but I didn't want for you to hear me say through that our plate is full or that we're overwhelmed. So this particular slide is a picture of an empty platter, and on top of it are the words advocacy, accountability, and service. I definitely want for you to know that this agency is available not only to you, but also to your constituents. I would encourage you to contact me if you have any questions or concerns about things that you or your constituents may be experiencing. As the director of the Department of Children's Advocacy and as the state child advocate, I welcome your concerns and recommendations, as well as those of your constituents. I have included my office number as well as my cell number and the hotline number, if you will, the investigations unit number. And I will share this complete slide or PowerPoint with Amanda Adler. But I do want to let you know that when you get it and you see it, there may be a part of you that thinks, well, what in the world kind of thing is this that she's sharing? So just remember about that sandwich, okay? When you see it, just remember that there's this big sandwich, and I'd be glad to meet with you, and we can go over the whole slideshow again if that would be helpful too. But I wonder if you can see any part of my screen, or if you see me. I see stuff on my toolbar down here, and I don't want to clutter up your screen. But I wonder if you have any questions for me at this time, or if it has just been the most frustrating experience of your life to hear me talk 90 miles a minute without being able to see a PowerPoint. And I know that you'll be honest with me.
We appreciate your presentation. And does anybody have any questions for Amanda? Amanda, I think that you've been really busy the past year, and I don't know how you could possibly even sleep at night. You're doing so much. I think Director Leach has a question for you.
Yeah, Director Whittle, I just commend you just in a year how much you have accomplished in really building a whole, pretty much an agency that is being responsive to citizens and moving the working alongside us and others in sort of really moving towards a 21st century child well-being system, right? Where we are addressing the needs of children where they're at and your goals, those 3 areas for that 6 years, I mean, I think are spot on, and we look forward to working with you. Sometimes it is difficult as far as, just you guys are continue to hold us accountable. But, I think if we continue working together, we're gonna do a lot of good work. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? If not, I want to remind everybody to thank you again, Director Whittle. And I know I slip up and call you Amanda because I feel like we're friends because we've been out wrestling kids together out at DJJ. So I slip up every now and then do that. So I apologize. But thank you again for that good presentation and all the things you've done this past year. So everybody remember to mute your microphone if you're not talking. And we're going to move on to our next presentation, which is the Department of Health and Human Services, I do believe. Right, Jennifer Buster, Director of IDEA Part C. And I think you're online, so we're going to go with you. Are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, can you see my PowerPoint slide?
We do actually see your PowerPoint slide. This is good.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we're off to a good start then. I want to thank Chairman Shealy and members of the committee for allowing me to speak today. As you mentioned, I'm Jennifer Buster. I am the IDEA Part C Program Manager, or Part C Coordinator, as they're called in some states, or BabyNet Director. Any of those fit. And I'm going to talk to you today about the BabyNet program. And anybody have any suggestions on how to get it to go to the next slide?
I think Amanda's working on it. She has control.
Jennifer, are you sharing your screen?
It helped me stay in touch.
I thought you could see it.
I can do it from here.
Is anybody in the room under 30?
No.
Really? Okay.
Jennifer, if you can hear me.
Thank you, Amanda.
Just let me know when to advance.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. You can go ahead. Next slide. Okay. So here today to talk about the BabyNet program, but need to start off by talking about IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is actually the federal law that not only ensures services for children with different needs and abilities, birth to 21, but also governs how those services are provided to the over 7 million children across the nation. Next slide. So there are actually 4 parts to IDEA. I'm here obviously today to talk specifically about Part C of the law, which governs how we provide services to children birth to 3. In South Carolina, that's known as the BabyNet program. In other states, there are other names. So I know Georgia's program is named Babies Can't Wait. So all of the names differ by state, as do the eligibility criteria. And I believe my colleague, Becky Davis, will talk later today about Part B of IDEA. And then I will mention Part D of the law is provisions for federal grants. And we actually have a contract with the Parent Training and Information Center in this state, which is Family Connection. And so they provide parent-to-parent support to a lot of the families that we serve. But again, I'm going to talk and focus my presentation on Part C of the law. Next slide. So a brief history about the South Carolina Department of Health and Human Services as the lead agency. In 2016, then Governor Haley signed an executive order transferring the program from the Office of First Steps to the Department of Health and Human Services. Staff moved around March of 2017, but did not become official employees, and the program move was not official until July of 2017. I did not join the BabyNet program until February of 2018, and immediately upon coming to the agency, began working with Director Baker as well as all of the members of my team to really turn around the BabyNet program and make a significant number of changes because there had been some issues in the past with compliance and with some data concerns and things like that. So we focused very heavily from the get-go on referral, intake and assessment, the things that are mentioned on the screen, payment system integration, which I know lots of folks came and presented at the last round of hearings about, general supervision, which is a requirement under IDEA, and then community and provider outreach. So really working to improve the relationships with pediatricians and other agencies in the community, which had sort of have become difficult in the past. Part of that work focused around a corrective action plan, which we voluntarily entered into right after I started in 2018 with the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. Typically when there are states have issues around compliance and things like that, they either are given the option to go into a full compliance agreement, which South Carolina had done in the past, or a corrective action plan. And so the state voluntarily entered into that corrective action plan. And again, I note here, everything outlined in that corrective action plan has since been resolved. Next slide. So this is just a quick visual of the BabyNet partners that the program is required to participate and coordinate services with. IDEA actually requires a comprehensive, coordinated, multidisciplinary interagency system of supports for children and families. So this is a visual of all of the agency partners, many of whom are represented on this meeting today. On the right side of your screen, you see the 3 different lead agencies that have actually housed the BabyNet program. So it originally started at the Department of Health and Environmental Control, then moved to First Steps, and then to Health and Human Services. The governor can move the BabyNet program at any time. That's under their purview to do. And so, of course, that's what's happened. I'll show my age a little bit and say that I have been involved with the program while it was at all 3 of those lead agencies. So I have quite a bit of history with the program. One of the ways that we get together and we meet as agencies is through the South Carolina Interagency Coordinating Council, a group of individuals that are both governor appointees and then members of the community, providers. It's open to guests. We meet about once a quarter to talk about things related to the BabyNet program. That body is required for us, and they are to advise and assist the lead agency in carrying out the program. And then a number of us also meet probably every other month through a program managers group to talk about issues that, what's working well, what's not, collaboration on training, anything that we can do to improve the service delivery system to the children that we serve. So that would be representatives from Part B, like Jenny May, the 619 coordinator, Louise Johnson from DMH, Elaine Gentry at the School for the Deaf and the Blind. So all sorts of folks that we get together and just talk about the service delivery system. Next slide. So this is a screenshot of one of the big significant changes since the program moved to the Department of Health and Human Services, and that has been the beginning of this online referral portal, which we were thrilled to implement. So we have folks that can call at any time and make a referral. So anyone at any time can refer a child to the BabyNet program. You can refer your neighbor's child, you can refer your own child, a pediatrician can refer a child. So anyone can pick up the phone and dial the number there, and our staff will enter the information into the online portal, or a family member or a pediatrician's office or whoever can go on this online portal and actually complete the referral online and then upload documents to support why they feel the child may be eligible for BabyNet services. So in the instance of a pediatrician's office, they can fill out the online portal, they can upload the documentation supporting, for example, that a child has Down syndrome. We confirm that as a second discipline when it comes to the BabyNet program, and that child is immediately made eligible, and then their child's case is sent on for service delivery. So it's been a huge asset to the program and allows families and other professionals flexibility. One thing I will say about this online portal also is back to those relationships and really repairing and continuing to build relationships. We talked with a number of pediatricians prior to this going live, and then since it's gone live, We also got feedback from several of them saying that they felt like the online portal was too long. So we actually went in and shortened it, and those changes are about to go live in the next week or so, if they haven't already. So we're definitely open to feedback, and we wanted to make sure it was something that they would be comfortable using and would use. So we've shortened it. Next slide. So this is information about South Carolina's eligibility criteria. I mentioned earlier, each state is different. So this is what we use in South Carolina. Children can come in through an established risk condition. Like I mentioned before, Down syndrome, a suspicion of autism. It may be a vision or hearing impairment that's been a diagnosed condition. A child might have failed a newborn hearing screening. And so they may come through as an established risk condition. If they don't come in with an established risk, they may come in under a developmental delay. So my child, for example, had a developmental delay and had an evaluation and was found to be eligible. So if a child has a developmental delay, we're looking at the criteria outlined down there in red. So that's 2 standard deviations, which is approximately a 40% delay in one domain or one area of development, and then 1.5 standard deviations, which is approximately 25% in 2. So typically you'll hear folks say a 40% delay in one area or 25 in 2 will qualify children for BabyNet in South Carolina if they do not have an established risk condition. Children who come in who the family or the pediatrician suspects autism, we will conduct what's called an MCHAT as well as a STAT. And if both of those tools indicate concerns, then those children are made presumptively eligible for BabyNet. And they can receive all services under the program. And before the age of 3, then that's when we definitely try and get a full evaluation for those children. So again, we know it's important to catch children as early as possible. I can tell you the great news recently with the uptick in referrals. South Carolina, for birth to 12 months, our expected enrollment would be 699 children, and our current enrollment is 781 children. And for birth to 36 months, our expected enrollment would be 5,996 children, and ours is currently 6,657 children, which is 661 children over the expected enrollment. So our numbers are definitely up, which is a great thing, because that means we're finding the children that need the services. In order to figure out if a child is eligible for services, an evaluation is done called the Battelle Developmental Inventory. Those would typically be done either in an office at HHS or out in the community at an HHS eligibility office or in a family's home. Obviously, COVID has impacted that a great degree, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But they call it a BDI, is done to determine whether or not a child is eligible for the children that come in with a developmental delay. What you see on your screen now are a list of the 16 services that are outlined in the regulations for BabyNet, for Part C services. I can tell you that the three of the ones that are mentioned on the right-hand side, service coordination, special instruction, and speech and language pathology services, are probably the 3 most frequently utilized services, followed by physical and occupational therapy. So all of these services are available, but then it's up to the individualized family service plan team and all of the providers that serve that child to determine what actually goes on that child's plan, which I'll talk about on the next slide. So an IFSP, as we refer to it, is the document that outlines the services that that child and family will receive. This program is different than many of the services delivered after a child leaves our program, because you see there that we're focusing on not just the child, but also the family. For the service of special instruction, which was one of the services mentioned, it's very important that the caregiver is part of the delivery of those services. We really want families of young children to learn and for us to teach them so that they can carry out these services in the child's day-to-day routines and activities. So the service coordinators are the folks that typically serve these children after they're found eligible, and they can be typically, it used to be under a contract with the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs or employed by the South Carolina School for the Deaf and the Blind. There still is some contractual arrangement there, but those folks are also now Medicaid providers, and they're actually enrolled as Medicaid providers with the Department of Health and Human Services. Mention here that the information about the children's plans are entered into an online system because teaming is very, very important, and all members of that child's team have access to that child's information online. So they can see the services at all times online, which again is very important when you're trying to serve a child and make sure that all providers and everyone involved in that child's life can see what's going on. Next slide. I want to talk briefly about natural environments. 303.16 in the regulations. Part C requires that services are delivered to children in settings that are natural or typical for children of same age peers that don't have a disability. So the providers that serve our children go into homes, they go into parks, they may go to a child care center, they may go to the grocery store. It all depends upon what's in that child's plan and what that family really identifies that they want to work on with their child. If something's identified but a family's not interested in working on it, then the service coordinator and the other providers shouldn't focus on that. It's very family driven. So there is a way that we can justify services to be provided in a clinic setting, but that should never be the first option for a family or a child. Next slide. Transition. So then we have to talk about sort of what happens after children leave our program, and we really start doing that as soon as the child enters the program. So we start talking about transition, and transition is included as part of that plan that I mentioned earlier from the time that the child enters the program until the time they leave. There are three big parts of transition for a BabyNet child. The first being transition notification, and that is information that the Team for Early Childhood Solutions, which is a group out of USC School of Medicine, sends directory information to the state Department of Education as well as the local education agencies on a monthly basis regarding the number of children that are in the program at that time. There's also a transition referral, which is later sent by the service coordinator regarding children who, again, are looking to transition out of the program and into a school-based setting. And then finally, the transition conference, which is a meeting with our BabyNet staff person, the service coordinator, the family, and then a representative of the local education agency. Again, sort of to bridge the gap as the family and the child leave one program and enroll in another. Next slide. So there are a couple different ways that a child can leave the baby or exit out of the BabyNet program. A child can meet their outcomes at any time prior to age 3. So if a child comes in and they meet all of their developmental goals and outcomes and they're functioning as their same age peers, they could leave at 2 years of age, or they could remain in until their 3rd birthday. That's a family decision. The family can decide at any time that they don't want services anymore, and they could end everything, or a child turns 3 and then obviously ages out of the program and hopefully into another one, or is caught up developmentally and needs no further services. Next slide. So a little bit of current data about the program. Luckily, this sort of fell at the end of the fiscal year, so I was able to give you guys information for an entire year's worth of programming. So from 7/1/19 through 3/9/2020, there were 15,212 referrals to the BabyNet program. We are currently serving just a little under 7,000 children with the individualized family service plans that I mentioned earlier. The number is actually higher at the program in any number at any given time. There's typically around 1,000 children that are in the intake process in a given month. So it may be as much as 1,000 children higher, but again, those children are working their way through the eligibility process. The top referral sources for us are listed there: physicians, parents, and then CAPTA, our friends at DSS, that's Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. Those are children who have substantiated cases of abuse and neglect, and they're required to refer to the Part C program. And we talk frequently with representatives at DSS about those children in that process. We currently contract with around 300 therapy companies who employ almost 2,500 therapists that serve the children across the state, and more than 500 service coordinators that that actually serve the children as well. Next slide. Wanted to talk a little bit about transition data, because again, I know the Department of Education is going to talk in a little bit. This just looks specifically at transition out of the BabyNet program. So again, from July 1st to June 30th, just to sort of, what you're seeing here is the number and the percent of timely transition conferences. The middle column is the number and percent of untimely transition conferences, and then the total. Obviously, we would love it if that was 100%, that all of them were timely, but life happens and that doesn't always occur. The good news is the average number of days in between the conference and the child's third birthday is 106.7 days, which is well within the requirements that we have set forth as to when the conference is supposed to take place. It should be between 27 and 33 months of age. And then you see there listed at the bottom the key for our districts: Charleston, Spartanburg, Anderson, Richland, Colleton, Horry, and York. So 83% of the transition conferences are completed timely, and that's certainly a good thing. It's still an area that we want to improve upon as we go forward. Next slide. I wanted to give a real quick COVID update. We've issued a number of guidance since COVID hit. As you can imagine, I mentioned earlier, natural environments and seeing children and families in their homes. And so COVID has impacted this greatly. Many of our provider community has gone to virtual visits just like this one. Some folks have changed it so they see families outside, so they'll meet on the porch or in the yard and not actually go inside a family's home. Again, safety of everyone involved is of the utmost importance. I participate on a number of national calls regarding COVID with other Part C programs represented, so I can see sort of what other programs across the nation are doing. And the agency has posted a QA document for COVID-related questions. We actually sent some additional COVID-related guidance out to early interventionists today. So it's something we're continuing to monitor. I can tell you, initially when COVID hit, our eligibility numbers dropped around 40%, but they very quickly rebounded. And I'm told that for the last several weeks, our referral numbers are actually up and not down. So in terms of what the folks in the eligibility offices are doing now, the evaluation tool I mentioned earlier, the Battelle Developmental Inventory, there's actually a screener process for that as well. And that's what's being used currently to make children BabyNet eligible, since it's not safe to do home visits or office visits at this time. So it's actually the screener of the same tool that was used before COVID hit. Next slide. I wanted to talk real quick, and I'm probably over time, so I'll go quickly through these. Just some of the accomplishments since the program has moved to the Department of Health and Human Services. There've been a lot, and I mentioned earlier I've been involved in the program for a long time, so I feel like I'm qualified to speak on all the improvements and the true support that the program has received since it's moved at all levels of the agency. We've added a number of staff to reduce the amount of time it takes to find children eligible. I mentioned providers are now enrolled as Medicaid providers. The payment coordination piece, which I know you guys, again, heard from some folks, it was sort of rocky for a time, has gotten much, much better. We have a brand new policy and procedure manual for all providers. I mentioned the corrective action plan already. Another big thing is all reports that are due to the United States Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs have been submitted timely since the program moved. That was something that had been problematic in the past. Every report that's been due has been submitted timely. We have new brochures, which aren't exactly new now, but they all feature children who have received BabyNet services. So they're actually South Carolina BabyNet recipients or former recipients. We have integrated and continue to integrate the two data systems for more accurate reporting. And our determination score, while we still as a state fall into needs assistance, our raw scores have improved since the program moved. And we also issued findings for the first time in the program's history. That goes back to the general supervision piece I mentioned earlier. We're required to identify findings among our providers and issue findings when we do. And for the first time since the program moved, we've been able to do that. Next slide. And that's all that I have, unless someone has questions.
Thank you for your report. Does anybody have questions for Ms. Buster before we move on? Senator Hutto.
You talked in terms of a child being eligible. Can a parent refuse services for an eligible child?
Yes, sir.
Is that
Yes.
a form of neglect?
I mean, it's my understanding that unless a parent was court ordered to receive services, that they can be voluntarily withdrawn at any time and a family can refuse.
Do you report that to DSS when they refuse?
I'm sorry, you broke up. I
Do you
heard
report a family's refusal to accept services for a child to DSS?
So, not necessarily, but I will say, I mentioned earlier, we work very closely with the Department of Social Services, Gwen Goodlett. And so one of the things that I think they've changed on the DSS side is for foster families. I believe that foster parents are no longer allowed to refuse services. And Director Leach can probably jump in there, but I'm fairly certain that at this point, foster families cannot refuse services. But we don't necessarily, for another family that was referred, we wouldn't necessarily reach out and notify DSS if a family refused services.
Well, I'm okay. We can follow up about this later, but it just seems to me that if we're concerned about the best interest of children and we've got a referral from a doctor that says that in order for this child to progress and become receive all of the therapies and assistance that the child needs, that we might be letting some children fall to the wayside if there's no way to keep up with it. If a family just says no, it could be a meth head. I mean, you would just let anybody just say, no, I'm not going to let my child get services?
I can tell you that what I will say is that when children are referred, and if it's for example, a pediatrician makes that referral, we do send information back, a referral follow-up basically back to the person that referred the child, but we don't typically give them information on what the disposition of the situation was. So we don't necessarily tell them. However, we do, if a child is in services, we do provide copies of the child's IFSP, and we do send those to pediatricians regularly. So it's one of the steps that we take. We provide them to the family as well as the pediatrician. So,
well, I understand that. The pediatrician may have referred it, and if the parent says no, at that point, I think the pediatrician's hands are tied. They've made the referral to you, and you've reached out to the parents and they've said no. It just seems to me that needs to go to DSS at that point to find out if there's something wrong with the parent.
Right.
Senator Hutto, we'll follow up with Jennifer. Our team does work closely with her and her team, and so we'll follow up and obviously look at the statute and figure out where all of that fits in. And just kudos to them. I mean, we have on the foster care side, 98% of the children eligible just based on age get referred. Our timeliness for referrals is about 60%. So we have in 30 days. So we have some work to do on making sure our staff are doing it as quickly as possible. But it was 20 to 30% a year ago. So we've done a good job working with them, making sure that the right kids are getting at least referred to the service.
Do we have other questions? Okay, if we don't have any other questions, thank you, Ms. Buster, for that report. You did a great job, and we appreciate it. Now we've learned about children from 0 to 3. Now we're going to move forward and learn about what's going on further up the line. We have with us from the State Department of Education, Rebecca Davis, Director of the Office of Special Education Services. Rebecca.
Thank you. Can everybody see my screen?
We see, yes, we see a page up there that says Office of Special Education Services, so that must be your screen.
Okay, good. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee this afternoon. And Jennifer's done a great job of laying a lot of the foundation that runs throughout her program, Birth to 3, and then our program, age 3 to 21. For our age range, we do serve two groups of students. We serve our early childhood children who are 3 to 5, and then our children that are considered school age, 6 to 21. And the purpose of what we do is laid out in the law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And the purpose is to make what we refer to as a free, appropriate public education available. And what that free appropriate public education, or FAPE, means is it's instruction and supports that are designed to meet a student's unique needs that result from the student's disability. And those services are provided in order to prepare the student for further education, employment, and or independent living. Another purpose of the IDEA is to protect the rights of children with disabilities. And as the state education agency, we're charged with assisting districts in the provision of special education and then assessing and ensuring the effectiveness of all of the efforts. So we have 12 categories, 12 distinct categories of disabilities under the IDEA. That does not mean that there aren't other disabilities out there, but these are the 12 that are recognized under the IDEA. We have autism, which includes all of the spectrum disorders, Asperger's syndrome, autism spectrum, pervasive developmental delay, and they're all kind of together under the umbrella of autism. We have deaf and hard of hearing, deaf blindness, developmental delay, which is our age 3 through 9-year-old, emotional disabilities, intellectual disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, specific learning disabilities, and this includes learning disabilities that would impact reading, written language, written expression, math, oral expression, and listening comprehension. And this is the category that's usually associated with dyslexia. And that's where students with dyslexia, if they meet the eligibility criteria and then need specially designed instruction, fall. We also have speech language impairment, traumatic brain injury, and visual impairment. This is a snapshot from our most recent data collection. We have almost 109,000 students with disabilities, ages 3 through 21 in the state that we serve in public school settings. The majority of those students, 39%, have a specific learning disability as their primary disability. And when we talk about a primary disability, because the student can have be eligible and receive services under more than one category of disability, the student's individualized education program team, IEP team, has to decide for accountability purposes, which disability will be listed on the IEP as primary. It doesn't mean that that's the most important disability and other disabilities aren't as important. It's just a reporting category. So the majority of our students with disabilities are in the category of specific learning disability. 17% have speech language impairment as a primary disability category. 15% have other health impairment as primary, and that's the category that, again, is sort of a catch-all. It's where students with attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity disorder fall. It could also be students with sickle cell anemia or other health impairments would fall. And then 10% of our students with disabilities in the state have autism as a primary disability category. Again, that's a primary category. We do have a significant number of students who have more than one disability. So we have a variety of types of services that are offered, and these services are determined by the child's IEP team. The IEP team is made up of the parents, a general education teacher of the student, a special education teacher of the student, someone who is appropriate to make decisions regarding funding and services that we call a local education agency representative, or LEA rep. You also, as part of the IEP team, have someone who is able to interpret assessment data for the team and with the team, but that's the core requirements for a team. Teams can call in anyone with expertise that they feel needed. So if a child has health issues, the school nurse may be part of the team. Parents can invite anyone that they want to participate in the meeting. But that core team makes all decisions regarding the child's instructional and educational needs. The IEP is the written document for the child with a disability that's developed, reviewed, and revised according to our regulations. The IEP has to be reviewed and revised at least annually, or as often as progress would indicate needed, or as requested. So when we talk about special education, we mean specially designed instruction that is designed to meet the unique needs of a child that result from his or her disability or disabilities. So when we talk about special education, it's instruction that is designed to meet the unique needs of that student. And it doesn't matter whether those unique needs are typically associated with that disability category or not. And so we never say all students with autism get A, B, C, or D. We talk about the individual unique needs of that child with autism. With special education, that means we are adapting as appropriate to meet the child's needs, the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction. So we are adapting what's being taught, how it's being taught, or how the instruction is being delivered so that it can address the unique needs of the child. We're doing that to ensure that the child with a disability has access to the general curriculum so that the child can meet the general educational standards. All of our children are Gen Ed kids first and foremost. The purpose of special education or an IEP is to allow that child access to that general curriculum and the opportunity to progress and access what's going on in Gen Ed. So services can be direct or indirect, specially designed instruction. Direct services that's pretty self-explanatory. That's face-to-face services. Now it's virtual services, but it's services that are directly provided to a student with a disability by a teacher. Indirect services would be things that the teacher might do behind the scenes to allow for accessibility. For example, if we have a child who needs large print, a child with a vision impairment who needs large print, an indirect service would be the special ed teacher or a teaching assistant enlarging font on the child's reading book or the child's worksheets. So services can be direct or indirect. We have related services, and these are developmental, corrective, and other supportive devices that are required to assist the child with a disability to benefit from special ed. So related services are needed in order for the child to benefit from the special ed services or instruction. Related services might include, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means, it might include transportation. So the IEP team would determine that without special transportation, for example, a child in a wheelchair, that child cannot get to school to access his instruction. So transportation would be a related service. Another related service might be audiological services for a child who is deaf or hard of hearing, who wears a hearing aid and would need an audiologist to check that hearing aid regularly to make sure it's working. It could be psychological or counseling services that unless the child had those, he would not be able to cope with instruction or cope with the school setting. It also could be, and the ones that are typically thought of are physical or occupational therapy, but also parent training or recreational therapy. So related services, again, are those services that a student needs in order to be able to benefit from his special ed instruction. Services also include accommodations and modifications, and accommodations change how the student learns. For example, a student may not be able to take notes because of a physical impairment, so notes would be provided to him. That's a change in delivery of instruction or a change in the methodology. Modifications, on the other hand, change the actual content that a child is taught or expected to learn. So a child, for example, with a significant cognitive disability may need alternate achievement standards, may need power standards to be taught, and the amount of what he is supposed to learn may be reduced. That would be a modification. Other types of services include supplemental aids and services, and these are supports that are provided in a regular ed class or other education-related settings or even extracurricular or non-academic settings to enable the child with a disability to participate to the maximum extent appropriate and possible with kids without disabilities. Another type of services are transition services. And in South Carolina, those services begin at age 13 and are correlated with the individual graduation plan that's required beginning at age 13 for all students. This is a coordinated set of activities that are designed to facilitate a child's movement from school to post-school activities. So whatever the student is going to do when he leaves school, whether that's enroll in post-secondary education, in vocational education, a job training program, some type of employment, continued or adult education, some type of adult services. It also may include independent living or community skills and participation. So these are some of the types of services that teams would consider as they're developing an IEP for a student. And again, the whole purpose is to develop that set of services and supports in order for that student to access and progress in the general ed setting. In as least a restrictive environment as possible, which is what this slide talks about. So we're required by law to make sure that children with disabilities are educated with children who do not have disabilities as much as possible, and they are removed only if the nature or severity of their disability is such that education in a regular class with all of the supplementary aids, services, and supports cannot be achieved for the student satisfactorily. So as I said a few minutes ago, that all children are gen ed kids first. When we have a child that we're evaluating for eligibility or we're developing an IEP for, the first place that child that we look at is that general ed setting, and the team asks the questions: what services, supports, accommodations, modifications do we need to put in place in order for that child to be able to access that general ed setting and that general ed instruction? And we provide more and more intensive supports and services, and only remove that child from that gen ed setting if it's such that the supports and services cannot be provided in that gen ed setting. So we talk about least restrictive environment, or LRE. In South Carolina, for school-age children, we have primarily three categories of LRE. The first is for students who are inside the regular class for equal to or more than 80% of their school day. The next LRE classification is students who are inside the regular class for 40 to 79% of their school day. And then the third LRE is students who are inside the regular classroom for less than 40% of the day. And for that, that bottom LRE class, that's primarily the students who need very intensive, very modified instruction and curriculum. For preschool students, because South Carolina, of course, doesn't have a mandatory universal pre-K program, when we talk about least restrictive environment for preschool children, especially those children ages 3 and 4, we're talking about a home setting, or it may be a daycare setting, or a private preschool. So the LRE setting for preschool children, we look at a little differently than we do for school age. So we have a regular early childhood EC setting for children who are in that regular setting at least 10 hours per week. Then we have a regular early childhood setting, other location. This may be a child who is in a typical preschool or at home, but goes to a speech language clinic to receive services. Then we have the students, preschool students who need more intensive supports, and they would be those that are considered to be in an early childhood regular setting less than 10 hours a week, meaning that they're getting more specialized instruction that's outside that early childhood setting. And then the same as the other location for at least 10 hours per week, or for less than 10 hours. So here's kind of a snapshot of where we are. As I'm sure you're aware, Greenville is our largest district. Greenville has just about 12,000 students with disabilities. Our smallest district right now is Barnwell 29, and that district has 93 students with disabilities. So out of our about 109,000 students, you see that every district in our state, every state-operated program, which are our programs like Department of Juvenile Justice, Palmetto Unified at Department of Corrections, our governor's schools, all of our LEAs, all of our districts and state-operated programs currently have at least one student. When we report data, we're required to suppress data for 10 students or less typically, so for confidentiality purposes. So our smallest traditional district, and I say right now because, as you know, we've got some districts that are going to be consolidating soon. But right now, Greenville is our largest and Barnwell 29 is our smallest. With our school-aged LRE, 62% of our students with disabilities are inside the gen ed classroom 80% or more of their school day. So the vast majority of students with disabilities are in the gen ed setting for the vast majority of their school day. We have about 15% of our students who are out inside the gen ed class less than 40% of the day. And again, those are the students that typically require more specialized, more intensive special education and services and supports. For our preschoolers, just about 50% are receiving the majority of their special education services in a regular early childhood program. Now, again, you have to remember that that could be anything from a home setting to a private preschool to a Head Start program or to one of our 4K EIA programs or CERDEP programs. Our progress is governed by a state performance plan. All states are required to develop this plan. Our Part C counterparts have the same plan, and you saw some of the data that Jennifer reported. But states report on the progress for our indicators in the state performance plan every year through an annual performance report. And the indicators are designed to measure child and family outcomes. And then there are also compliance indicators. So our outcome measures have to do with graduation rate, dropout rate, performance on our statewide assessments, which for us include SC Ready and our end of course assessments for Algebra 1 and English 1. We look at instruction in the least restrictive environment as an outcome because we look at what percentage of our students are receiving their instruction in a gen ed setting. We look at parent involvement as an outcome measure because the research clearly shows us that the more involved parents are, the better outcomes their children have. And then we look at preschool outcomes and post-secondary outcomes. Our compliance indicators have to do with disproportionate representation, ensuring that decisions are not made on students based on race, ethnicity, or disability, as well as timely evaluations for students that are referred and having IEPs in place by the 3rd birthday for students who receive services under Part C. And then our final indicator is the state systemic improvement plan, and our state has chosen as its goal to improve or increase the number of students with disabilities that are scoring MET and above on our statewide assessment, SC Ready, by the end of 3rd grade. So for our dropout rate, and that's a 4-year cohort, that is students entering 9th grade and then 4 years later are they graduating with a regular high school diploma. 52% of our students with disabilities are graduating with a regular high school diploma, and over the past we've had the state performance plan in place, and I go back a little longer even than Jennifer does, but we've had the state performance plan in place for about 18 years now. We're just finishing the 3rd of the 6-year cycles, and every year our graduation rate for students with disabilities has improved. Our dropout rate, for the most part, has dropped every year. At this point, it's 4% of students with disabilities who drop out. Our English language arts and our math performance broken down for, and when we report elementary, that's elementary and middle together, and that's our SC Ready scores 3rd through 8th grade. And then our high school scores are end of course Algebra 1 and English 1. Our performance, when you look across the past 15 years or so, you will see a lot of up and down with our performance on our statewide assessment because we have changed the statewide assessment that's been given. Again, I go back a year or two, I'll leave it at that, to remember when we gave the BSAP, Basic Skills Assessment Profile. We've had a number of changes in those statewide assessments. So as we get a new test, we have to reset our baseline every year with that. Since we have had SC Ready, we have seen very slow improvement, and I'll talk about what we're looking to do about that. Our parent involvement rate, and this is the percentage of parents who report that the school has made efforts to involve them in their child's IEP process, is typically, 98% or better. Our post-secondary outcomes, we are looking at the number of students 1 year after they leave high school, whether that's graduating with a regular high school diploma, whether they are aging out at 21, because students with disabilities are eligible to stay in school to and through 21. We're required after 1 year of having left school to contact those students and find out what they're doing. Are they enrolled in higher ed, university, or a tech program? Are they enrolled in higher ed or competitively employed? Or are they enrolled in higher ed in some type of post-secondary training program, or are they competitively employed or have some other type of employment like supported employment? 24% of our students with disabilities last year when they left school, or year before, 24% reported that they were enrolled in an institution of higher ed. 47% reported that they were either enrolled in a higher ed program or were competitively employed. And when you roll that together and include any other post-secondary training or any other employment, 70% of our students with disabilities are fit into that category. I can tell you that with our work we really feel that post-secondary outcomes is our ultimate outcome measure, because if we're doing everything else right from beginning to end with our kids, then we'll see these numbers grow. We excuse me, are in partnership with a lot of our disability advocacy organizations, particularly ABLE SC, and have been working closely with them in this area. We have a Transition Alliance of South Carolina that pulls together our transition and our post-secondary resources and does a great job in coordinating all the stakeholders involved in post-secondary outcomes. On the other end of our age range with preschoolers, we have a similar group, the South Carolina Partnership for Inclusion, that works to ensure that our preschoolers are engaged in high quality, early childhood appropriate inclusion activities. So this, again, we report data in these areas every year through our annual performance report. And all of our annual performance reports can be found on our website. I can also send you, if you're interested in our kind of longitudinal data for all of our indicators. But these are our state performance plan is what we really consider our guiding areas, because these are our major outcome areas that we're looking at, and these are our the compliance areas that we're required to address as well. My office is organized around 4 focus areas, and the first is early childhood outcomes. And so we look at the indicators in our state performance plan that have to do with early childhood outcomes. We have an academic focus group that is looking right now primarily at reading, because that's such a critical area for us. We have a social emotional learning group because we know that there's no way to separate social emotional support and learning from academic support and learning. And then we have a post-secondary outcomes group. Those groups work together because, again, what we build in early childhood is going to impact how we do with academics and social emotional, and then all of that is going to impact how well we support our students with disabilities with their post-secondary outcomes. To give you a comparison and sort of how the Office for Special Education Programs, which is the federal division that looks at states and their special ed services, states are ranked highest to lowest in the National Assessment of Educational Profile, the NAEP scores for reading and math. That's the only academic measure that every state gives. It's the only one that is similar from state to state. So we don't compare states as far as their statewide assessment, because no other state, of course, has the SC Ready. that's a measure that was designed particularly for South Carolina, aligned with our standards. So the OSEP does use the NAEP comparisons for reading and math. The NAEP is given every other year to a random sample of schools and students. States are also ranked highest to lowest for graduation rate and then lowest to highest for dropout rate. States are then divided into, OSEP calls it tertiles, Tertiles. It was a new word that I learned. But so the top third of the states with the highest graduation rate, middle third, lowest third. Same for dropout and NAEP scores. It's difficult to compare graduation rates and dropout rates because the graduation requirements differ significantly from state to state. As you know, our state has one route to a high school diploma. We have a set number of requirements. Everybody has to meet it in order to earn that diploma. Other states have different routes or varied routes to earn that high school diploma. So it's very difficult to compare ratings of states that way. Dropout definitions also differ significantly. In our state, we consider a student a dropout who has left school, is not moved, known to be continuing. So it's not a student, it's a student that we can't find enrolled anywhere else, who has not graduated with a regular high school diploma, and who has not aged out for IDEA purposes at 21. We do not include students for our graduation rate who have earned a GED or are enrolled in adult ed. So if a student earns a GED, according to our state's dropout rate, that student would still be, or dropout definition, that student would still be considered in the dropout. Oops, so sorry. I have a very sensitive mouse. So as far as our funding is concerned, all of our funding is federal funding. And IDEA is an excess cost law or an excess cost fund. And what that means is our IDEA funds can only be used for expenses that are above and beyond those that are spent on average for the elementary and secondary school student, which is known as excess cost. So you have to look at what we're spending on all students, and then you can use IDEA funds to pay for any excess cost that it would cost a district to educate that child with a disability. When IDEA was passed back in '76, Congress promised that it would be funded at 40% at least. In reality, the highest we've ever gotten, I think, has been about 19%, and we're currently at 12 to 14% of that excess cost. The rest of that funding for the cost of educating a student with a disability has to be made up from state and local funds. So an LEA has to use IDEA funds to pay only for the excess cost of providing special education and related services to students with disabilities. The district has to budget and spend at least the same amount of either state or local or state and local funds for the education of students with disabilities from year to year. So they have to maintain at least that level of funding. If a district meets that required level of funding, it also meets the requirements to be able to use IDEA funds. All state and local funds flow through directly to districts, and none of those funds are kept at the state for special ed administration. We currently receive about $187 million for school-age children with disabilities per year for our IDEA grant, and about $7 million for our preschool children, and that should be ages 3 to 4, not 3 to 2. More than 85% of the federal funding flows directly through to districts. from the state to provide those services and to pay for those excess costs. My contact information is here. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer. And again, I very much appreciate the opportunity this afternoon.
No, I have a bunch of questions, so I'm just I need you to call me, okay? I want, specifically, I want to know what happened to our IEP kids during COVID, but rather than give me the answers to all my questions about that today, about.
She can give you a quick answer.
All right, what happened to our kids with IEP during COVID?
Kids with IEPs, teachers make contact with kids. The first thing that they did was to look at what types of gen ed services districts were providing to all kids. And then they looked at working with parents to determine how students with disabilities needed to access that gen ed instruction and that continued opportunity for instruction that was being provided for all kids in that district. We, as you know, we had a wide variety of how gen ed instruction and instructional opportunities were provided, anything from pretty much seamless virtual online instruction to paper and pencil packets. So special education teachers made contact with parents to provide every practicable way to address and access what was being provided for the gen ed students.
So did you maintain contact with all the gen ed students? Are they all accounted for?
We have not. I think the department is in the process of collecting that information from districts as far as all kids being accounted for. Because of the nature of special ed and how individualized it is, I would be surprised if our numbers of students that districts were not able to contact was anywhere near what it was for the gen ed population. Again, typically our special ed teachers have good communication with parents. The guidance from our office was health and safety of everybody first. The second was the child's needs above compliance. And then the third was communication with parents. So we worked with districts to try to find ways to communicate, to document what they were doing and what was going on. And again, that ranged anywhere from paper and pencil packets that teachers helped adapt for kids with special needs to students logging in to a Google Classroom with their resource teacher, just about like they would have done walking through that door in a brick and mortar school.
Do you know what the results were? I mean, do you know whether the kids with the IEPs actually progressed at the same rate they would have, and the other kids in the class?
That's what we're going to be looking at when school reopens. That will be the first thing we do with all kids. We're going to assess what the impact of the school closures had on all kids, and then specifically child by child, what the impact was on students with disabilities. When we find that we will have a good number of students with disabilities who were with their services able to pick up and access their gen ed instruction, again, not much differently than they did in the brick and mortar or face-to-face setting. We'll have other kids that were not. For example, if we had a child with significant physical disabilities that required physical therapy and that required hand-over-hand movement or exercises that could not be done safely with the child, there will be situations where districts will assess and say we were not able, even with every practicable and reasonable effort, to be able to provide these services. It did impact the child, and here's the services we will provide to compensate for that, to make up for that, to help the student recover. And those decisions will be made as part of the IEP team in consultation with the parents.
So let me switch just a little bit and ask you one more thing. What about districts who don't have the right therapist in their geographic area for what the students' needs are? How do y'all help those more rural districts access a therapist that may not live within 50 miles of that? Do y'all keep a registry or something that the districts can access to know where the closest qualified person is for a student that might have a unique need that's outside of a metropolitan area?
So we do, and special ed teachers are the same. We do have a shortage in South Carolina. It is more difficult to meet the needs of our kids in more rural areas. And so we encourage districts to work with each other to develop shared services agreements so that I know that Charleston has a shared service agreement with several surrounding smaller, more rural districts that they provide through contract services. We do have contract agencies in the state that districts can go to provide therapy services, and we're doing a lot more, and agencies and districts are doing a lot more with virtual or teleservices at this point. We know that's not the answer for all kids, but it is a way to reach some kids, and I'm sure when Department of Mental Health talks that you'll hear a lot about their telepsychiatry program, and the way we're using that to help reach kids and families in rural areas. So the other thing that we have is a program called SC Create, where the state will pay for a teacher or a teaching assistant or a school employee to go back to school, pay books, tuition, everything, to go to be certified as a special ed provider or some of the related service providers like orientation and mobility for students who have vision issues. So we have that program as well. That we're trying to grow as well, and school psychologists and speech language pathologists have been added and are part of SC Create as well.
Thank you.
We have other questions? I'm sure there'll be more questions later, but for now, thank you very much. Next, we have Kathy Coleman, and she's actually here, so we don't have to look at the screen anymore. We can look at her lovely face here with us today. And Kathy was chair of Accelerate Ed SC Task Force, and she's the director of Clemson University Sand Hill Research and Education Center, and we are glad to have you with us, a real live person. Thank you.
I'm so surprised they didn't make you wear an orange mask.
Well,
She probably has one.
I have my saluda mask on today.
Okay.
Always got a little orange on. Oh, I have several Clemson masks. Thank you.
I bet people are bringing them to you from everywhere.
That's right. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for allowing me to be here today. As you said, I'm Kathy Coleman. I'm director of the Clemson University Sand Hill Research and Education Center. I've been with Clemson for about 34 years, and as many of you know, was in governmental affairs for about 29 of those 34 years. I'm chair of the Saluda School District 1 Board of Trustees, and today I come as chair of the Accelerate Ed Task Force, and most importantly, as a grandmother to a kindergartner. I was, really honored to serve in this capacity, and was privileged to work with an outstanding group of educators to develop these recommendations. Superintendent Spearman convened this task force late April and charged us with studying the barriers to school operations and student learning during the COVID pandemic, and then develop recommendations on how schools and districts in South Carolina can best resume school operations this summer, fall, and into the 2021 school year. We had a 13-member task force. They were representative of all levels of public K-12 education system. We had classroom teachers, superintendents, school board members. In addition, we had about 21 individuals that were advisory groups that guided our work. And then the State Department of Education staff were also invaluable in providing information to the task force. I would like to introduce Patrick Kelly, who was chair of our instruction subcommittee and was on the task force and did an outstanding job in his capacity there. Since April 30th, our subcommittees and full task force met about 26 times, and on May 26th, we produced our summer school report. The work of the task force has been guided, of course, by the key principle of protecting health, safety, and wellness of students and staff while giving students the best possible learning experiences that are close to normal as health and safety would allow. Our task was difficult, but I am proud of what we've been able to accomplish and the framework for success that we've laid out for our schools and districts. Throughout this process, we also strive to be transparent. Our meetings were live streamed. We took over 2,000 individual public comments from students, parents, educators, and taxpayers, and we were inclusive. We relied not only on the expertise of the task force and advisory members, but also those in professional education organizations across the state. And we presented our results to Superintendent Spearman, and she presented them on June 22nd. Now, we had 3 subcommittees that addressed sort of specific areas in our K through 12 operational system so that we could, work as efficiently as possible and best use our expertise on the task force. And those were building and student services, which included working on recommendations such as safety, space utilization, health protocols, addressing student services for special needs, ELL, and social emotional needs. Instruction, which addressed instructional planning and preparation, delivery of instruction using different models, assessments, diagnostics, outcome, and then professional development. And then operations and administration, which really tackled transportation, finance, food services, and other really operational, sort of daily operational of our operations of our school districts. To assist the school districts with planning, the task force really organized the report into 4 phases. Immediate actions, which are, really happening now or right after we released the report, summer planning and preparation, pre-opening and reopening and continuity of operations. And within each of these, we broke down our recommendations sort of by those traditional district operational areas of the subcommittees. The task force members work to provide districts sort of the menu of options to consider as they make decisions for the fall. And we know what may work for one district may not work in another. Of course, with the COVID-19 landscape and what we know about the virus changing rapidly, clearly the situation will differ from school districts to school districts. So we provided considerations for full in-person learning, hybrid models, and full remote learning. I would like to go over some of those important highlights. The full report is, it's lengthy, but we have a summary of it too. It's all on a website called dedicationtoeducation.com, or you can Google Accelerate Ed Task Force and find it there also. First, several recommendations were made for the State Department of Education to address. One, of course, collaborate with DHEC to develop clear criteria for defining the rate of the COVID spread. For the state to take the lead on the purchase of PPE, which of course they've done. Provide a waiver from state and federally mandated standardized tests. Develop additional distance learning resources. Address the amount of funding the state provides to help districts account for the increased costs they are incurring due to COVID-19 protocols. Develop a school health and safety sharing website and grants, and assist in addressing the digital divide. Throughout, of course, this report, you'll find some references, and we have also in the report a lot of appendices with resources for our school districts. We referred to a lot of the latest guidance from DHEC, which, of course, our districts rely on public health officials for the latest data and science, and COVID-19 pandemic is no different. A few highlights that I'd like to outline. One was that the school districts established their own task force with not only district leaders and teachers, but diverse community representation as well. And many districts have done this. I know my district has done that and are taking the Accelerate Ed recommendations to develop their plans. Two-way ongoing communications from the districts to students, parents, and staff is certainly imperative from now on to the start of school. This starts with surveying parents and staff and making informed decisions from their input. Many have already done this. Sent out these surveys and are analyzing the results to assist them in making these decisions. I really can't stress enough the importance of communication both internally and externally in our districts, and that we all have to work together in order to reopen our schools. Addressing the social and emotional needs of our staff and students. We all know that COVID-19 has placed extreme stress on everyone, and school communities will need to be prepared to offer support services when student and staff return. One important note was that our recommendations also include developing policies to include the prevention of bullying and harassment surrounding COVID-19. Establish policies and procedures for distance learning. We know that not every parent or teacher will feel comfortable returning to in-person instruction, no matter how many safety precautions are taken. And schools have to be prepared to serve these students and make arrangements for these educators. Our instruction subcommittee spent an enormous amount of time addressing these recommendations on how to prepare, certainly have us much better prepared than we were in March. Preparing school facilities and classrooms. Recommendations outline developing cleaning protocols based on the latest DHEC and CDC guidance, determining how the volume can be handled with custodial staff or supplemented with contractual services. Recommendations include levels of cleaning for frequently touched surfaces such as desks, classroom arrangements. Our building subcommittee worked very hard on making recommendations on how to practice to a largest degree social distancing. Recommendations include schools being outfitted with signage that illustrates social distancing, health precautions that need to be adhered to. We worked really hard on scheduling. Recommendations were made based on providing students with the best possible learning experiences. And those really requires aligning scheduling decisions with the latest recommendations, whether it's length of day or moving start times or scheduling, 5 days or whatever it might be, that those needed to be made on a school district basis, that they need to reevaluate their school calendars for the year. And also that they needed to avoid any scheduling scenarios where the burden falls on a teacher to simultaneously create and implement traditional and distance instructions in the same class at the same time. We all know that optimal learning environment for most students would be in person. Districts and schools should have plans in place to adjust scheduling models during the school year in event of a decline or a second wave of COVID-19. They also should develop contingency plans, and so that what works in August may not work throughout the year. And it could be that, our hope is that we could make adjustments to have even more students that could come back if all could not come back at one time. The task force recommended that districts have plans for students or families that cannot or choose not to return in-person instruction. On professional development, we talked a lot about training faculty and staff to make sure they are familiar with the new protocols, adjusting classroom settings, serving meals, should those result in adjusting those classroom settings so that they were fully informed and fully trained on those protocols so that they could spend their time focused on learning and understanding the social emotional needs of our children. Reviewing human resource policies, budget reviews. One recommendation is they had nurses in all the schools. Safety plans, visitation policies, transportation, food service, all those are addressed in various stages of planning for reopening. I'd like to point out that our task force recommended that districts have their plans ready to share with their communities no later than 20 days prior to the scheduled start of the school year. I encourage you to go to the dedicationtoeducation.com website and view the report summary. We tried to consider every aspect possible in providing guidance to our school districts as they develop plans for reopening, given the uncertainty of the pandemic. But one thing's for certain, our children need us to do everything possible to provide them the best learning experience possible as safety and health will allow. We acknowledge providing student learning and operation in our schools will be challenging and require hard work, leadership, and out-of-the-box thinking during this pandemic. But we believe our teachers, administrators, staff, and educational leaders are up to that challenge to provide a quality instruction and create new learning opportunities for our children. Happy to answer any questions. Again, this is the report. It's sort of a summary. We divided it into those sections. And it's a little lengthy, but it's on the website. Happy to answer any questions, or I'm sure Patrick would too. But thank you for letting me give you just a brief summary of that.
I think the senator from Orangeburg has a question.
So is there going to be a uniform policy that's going to require every single school district in this state to at least offer face-to-face learning this fall?
Ours are not a mandate. They're just a recommendation that is, first and that they should try to do that. But those will be based on.
That is your conclusion, though, that they should do that.
We think every school should try to get our kids back in school. Those will be based on the DHEC guidelines on those. What we did was we did a low, middle, and high spread, and those were developed by DHEC as to coming back face-to-face, sort of a hybrid model, or full distance.
And I understand that we basically are a state that's always had local control of the school districts by the school boards, but why would we allow there to be a wide range? I mean, if you've got two adjacent counties and the state's responsible for the education of children, and I think the American Academy of Pediatrics and everybody else says face-to-face learning, we really need to get back to that. That's the best way. Why would we let a school district not do that? I mean, you're saying we're going to leave it up to the school districts, right?
Exactly.
So if a school district says, I'm going to go virtual, and all three surrounding districts all the way around that one don't do that, why would we let that? I get it if the pandemic is still raging and it's unsafe. I think safety's got to be first.
Right.
Okay, I think everybody would agree to that. But at some point in time, doesn't Superintendent Spearman have to set a statewide policy of whether we're going to do this or not, as opposed to letting every individual district set that up? Because students are going to we're trying to provide a uniform, high-quality education to every student in this state. If we get where districts, some are letting one way and some another, some students are going to get lost in that. Some already are. A lot already are. And I'm just concerned that if we don't have a uniform from the top down, not I want you to do it, I think it would be good to do it, but you've got to do it. At least offer it. Or do you just think that we got to just leave it up to the school districts without the state having a uniform policy?
Well, Senator Hutto, we tried to provide guidelines that would, again, health and safety first, and a menu of options for school districts to consider. Again, it is up to the local school districts and what is happening in their communities and how they think they can best educate children. I don't think anybody would disagree with the fact that our kids need to be in school. That keeps me up late at night worrying about that, no doubt. I won't speak for Superintendent Spearman, but Katie's here. She can speak for Superintendent Spearman. I'll speak for the task force.
Yeah. So I was just to your point about the counties who are lumped together. So what we found is that the coastal counties are working together. The school districts are working together. They're coming up with a similar plan so that everyone in that area of the state is doing the same thing. We've also found, the Salkehatchie region, they're doing the same thing. All the Yorks are planning on doing the same thing. So they are working together to say, what does our area in the state look like, and how can we all kind of do the same thing so that we're best serving our children and the students, if that provides some.
It does. I'm just concerned that if we've got 80 different groups of people making decisions, and then we got various other parents groups, teacher groups, certainly all interested people. I mean, everybody's interested in the education of our children. I get that. But it just seems to me without having some uniform policy, and we're not a huge state. There's not going to be a whole lot of, you can look at the map now. The virus is everywhere. Yes, we have a few hot spots, but that kind of varies from week to week, month to month, as opposed to what I just think has got to be a statewide approach to what the answer is. Well, let me ask it another way. if one county or one school district gets way out of differential with, let's say 79 go one way and one goes the other, are we just going to let that be the norm for the kids that live in that one district?
Again, I mean, it's like the local control issue is it is left, it is being left up to the school board. The school boards are the ones who vote on the calendar. They're the ones who set the calendar for the district. We're providing the information. And I think the superintendent has, made it very clear she wants for these kids to be back in the classrooms. Students need to be back in the classroom. The best way for them to learn is face-to-face, but we still have to focus on the safety and make sure that we're not putting them into a situation where they become too vulnerable. She's definitely, we're working with districts, pushing, you can get your kids back safely, please do so, but at the same point, if it's not, we're doing the same thing for our summer camps right now. So Quincy and Taylor may be able to help me more with this one, but I think we have 21. I don't think all 27 are opening exactly in 2 weeks. I think it's staggered throughout the rest of the month and August. Yeah, but 21 are open now, and then 27, will continue to open throughout. So those started Monday. We're seeing, I've heard that Monday morning a lot of them showed up with their masks on, ready to go. I think they've been going, well, y'all are kind of in the trenches with that one more so than I am. So if you want to elaborate on that at all.
Well, we've just begun to support. We have our team that have reached out to the district liaisons, and we begin to, gather information. I will speak to a real nice success story, which is Dillon 4. If you are able to view WBTW Channel 13, they're highlighting their camp tonight at 6 o'clock. But they're trying to go face-to-face. I talked with the school district person in Union. They had started their camp. DHEC came in and has reduced the numbers that they can have in their camp. May even shut them down and force them to go virtually. So it varies from, I could talk about 5 and I would have 5 different responses to you, but we've begun to gather some data. And hopefully we'll be able to have that soon. But we've just started getting in and trying to support them now that the camps have gotten started.
Senator Shealy can.
It's okay. Madam Chair, yes, sir. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Coleman, thank you for your work on the task force. I just wanted to see, was there any discussion on, this pandemic has highlighted our inequities across the state. Was there any discussion on how we bring about, I'm a little bit more, pessimistic or realist or whatever on this pandemic. I don't think we're going to have a normal year at all. So I'm more concerned about, are we prepared for our students to have the virtual learning across the state? Was there any discussion on the task force about how we do so, recommendations?
Yeah, and I'll let Patrick talk about that, but absolutely. One of the things that's very concerning to us, of course, is the digital divide. And I know that the instruction subcommittee did make some, or looked at the broadband issue very carefully. It's okay, Madam Chair, if Mr. Kelly speaks to that?
As long as you're not going to read everything in those papers you got there.
No, ma'am, I just.
If you are, you're going to sit back down there.
No, I don't want to hear that either. I spent enough time looking at that. But that's an excellent question, Representative, and I think it also ties to Senator Hutto's point. I think ultimately we love to be able to open schools statewide, but the challenge of that is, as Representative Collins correctly identified, we have gross inequities across this state. And while it would be wonderful if we could have a statewide mandate one way or the other, if we had a statewide mandate to open all schools, brick and mortar, the simple reality is we have too many districts in this state that lack digital access, that lack facilities. If we adhere to social distancing requirements, as we should, as recommended by DHEC or by the American Association of Pediatrics, as you mentioned, Some of our schools don't have the capacity to do that because of furniture or because of square footage. We have hundreds of schools without a school nurse. A core underlying condition of our recommendations is what happens when a case of COVID-19 walks into one of our schools or suspected, because we know it's going to happen in the fall. That all pivots on the actions of a school nurse. If the district doesn't have a school nurse in a building, then they are not equipped to comply with what DHEC is recommending occur within a school. So the capacity to address a statewide approach to this, we don't have the capacity because of the inequities in our state. Now, what we do need, and what we've indicated in this report, is statewide guidance on basic health conditions and health requirements. And DHEC has done an excellent job of providing guidance on what to do if COVID occurs in the building. They're providing excellent updated weekly guidance on the rate of spread within counties so that counties are able, Charleston is a fundamentally different place than McCormick County right now when it comes to rate of spread. That's where we need state level leadership. When it comes to enforcement of mask requirements, of social distancing, we need to ensure that districts follow what DHEC provided and the Accelerate Ed Committee reinforced when it comes to enforcement of health provisions when and if schools reopen in person. In the event that they can't, Representative Collins, we looked at length at distance learning, because what happened from March until June is not distance learning as we would want it to be. Yesterday it was referenced as emergency deployed instruction in a hearing, and that was a term that we heard from a teacher, and that's right. We want to make sure that we're ready in the fall, whether we start at distance learning or whether we have to go to distance learning. So throughout the report, there are multiple stages that districts have to follow. Districts right now should be surveying staff to determine if they have staff that are interested in teaching distance learning or have unique skills and attributes, whether it be certification through the State Department or past experience. They should be surveying parents to determine if parents are interested in having a distance learning option for their child in the fall. And we know from state and national studies that there are a high percentage of parents that want a distance learning option, even if brick and mortar schools are open. Then we encourage districts to build a distance learning plan, and it is very detailed in the report in terms of what should be required. So whereas March through June was, in many cases, kind of building the plane as we fly, we've laid out the blueprint for the plane. So there are recommendations on having grading policies, having attendance policies, having engagement policies, what to do if we don't hear from a student. That's all there in terms of what districts should employ within that distance learning plan. And then we've identified resources that districts can use, whether that is building their own distance learning platform or school, as some of our larger districts are doing, whether that's using synchronous instruction of live streaming a brick and mortar class that is occurring, whether that's partnering with ETV, whether that's using asynchronous resources that already exist, or in some cases, augmenting paper packets and hard copy resources because we know the digital divide is too big to be closed by August 15th or whenever we need it closed by. So we've got a robust offering within the recommendation set to try to make sure that we're in front of the issue in August instead of playing catch up like we were in March.
Can I follow up on that?
Oh, yeah, because if you don't, I am.
Why don't we have a statewide, we've got statewide virtual, why don't we just, anybody that doesn't want to go face-to-face, rather than have every single school district invent a virtual school, why don't we send all the virtual kids across the state into one platform, even if it's 3 regional schools or whatever? Because I can tell you, in my rural school districts, the idea that you got broadband to even have virtual schools is a problem. I got kids that ride the bus over an hour, and I can't imagine putting all those kids on school bus for that long. And to me, we need to think about letting high school kids go one day and elementary. I mean, just we got to break up the number of kids on buses or get more buses or something. But just to address the virtual part, why would we want 80 different virtual platforms? Because that seems to going to take away. A teacher's going to have to divide their attention now between the kids in the classroom and the kids not in the classroom. Have y'all talked about that?
Yeah, that is addressed in the report in 2 ways. Number one, you're correct that Virtual SC already provides many of those resources, as does ETV. but it is not for all grade levels. SC Virtual has a robust offering across high school disciplines, some offerings in middle school, but little or no currently in K through 5. So in particular, the elementary world is where the existing virtual options are insufficient. And the State Department, and I'll defer to them to talk to that, are building out those resources so that it's available statewide, but that's not there at the moment. In terms of your question about the busing piece and hybrid, we've got that in here as well. And in terms of why we would want to have those district options available, in some cases, it's because virtual SC doesn't necessarily always have synchronous instruction, that direct live instruction with an instructor. And some of our districts have the capacity to do that and want to be able to do that. And certainly that has value in and of itself. But the recommendation set does encourage districts to rely on virtual SC, to partner with the State Department, and calls on the State Department to continue to build out available resources so that all grade levels have that access across the state as you're talking about.
Yeah, we'll go back to you.
Sorry, I wanted to sort of follow up on it. So I believe 19 of our school districts did not have e-learning capability. And I guess my question is, we're sitting here July 9th, and they still don't have e-learning capability. My guess is come August 10th or whenever their school start date is, they will not have e-learning capability. So is the answer from what I'm hearing from the task force is that we hope to have a better pen and paper aspect to it, or what's going to happen to these school districts when it does shut down or we don't start? Because that's going to happen. So what's going to happen in August, September, October, November? And what can we do as state leaders to push? For me, my goal would be to that digital divide, to close that gap. So what are there recommendations that we can work on?
So the General Assembly graciously 2 weeks ago extended funding through the CARES Act and Accelerate SC's recommendations to start closing that digital divide. And that's an important first step. But you're right, you can't just snap your finger, sign a check, and you have 150,000 devices and broadband access everywhere. So the report does speak to those issues and those challenges. One thing that it does that I think is critically important to what you're talking to, Representative Collins, about the inevitability, even if we go back, of having to shut down at some point. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but I'm like you as a realist, I think it's likely to happen. We are requiring districts to have a distance learning contingency plan in place, kind of like as a classroom teacher, I have to have emergency substitute plans for 3 days in case I have appendicitis or something that just lays me flat and I can't come up with sub-plans. So that at the snap of a finger, the school can put the sub into the classroom and there is material prepared for my students. It may not be ideal or aligned exactly to where I am, but it is quality learning material. We want districts, and we're encouraging districts to have the exact same thing in place for distance learning. So whereas this spring, when schools closed on March 13th, you could have gone to most district offices around the state and seen people late into the night building resource packets, then went out to students the next week. That shouldn't happen this fall if districts adhere to the task force report, because they should have those resources ready. We've also encouraged districts, when they come back in the fall, if we're able to go back in person, to build into their first 9 weeks calendar at least one distance learning practice day. Because we found research that was based in Asia from the SARS outbreak at the start of this century, that the countries that had a distance learning planning day in their schedule were better able to adapt when that pandemic struck and their students achieved at higher levels. So we want our districts to practice for that so that it's not this novel, unknown thing for teachers, families, and students when it happens.
Okay, I'm going to say my little piece here. I heard you say this a couple times. If we do this, and if we do this, and if we go back, and if we get these packets ready, and if we go back in August, and if we go back in September, and well, you know, we weren't prepared for it then, but I don't think we're prepared for it now. We're not prepared to go back in August. I don't think these districts are ready to go back. we've got 80, 79 districts, I think. We got 79 school districts. You might have a couple, 6, 10, 12 that are ready to go back. I think I've got the good school district, Lexington District 1. Dr. Little's over there just, doing television interviews, getting him a little self-ready. Do I think every school district's ready? No, I don't. I still think that there are 10,045 children that, and it's probably a different number today because it changes every day, that we haven't located. And even of the ones we've located, and I see them out there making faces, and I know what you're saying, because I can read through masks. But I know that of those you found, all of those didn't get an education. So we're going to leave people behind yet again whenever we start, if we just do distance learning or whatever we're going to do, virtual school or whatever you want to call it. Parents need to have an option. They need to have an option whether they want to send their kids to school or whether they want to do virtual learning. Let them sign, but make those parents be responsible. That I don't want to send my kids to school, but I'm responsible for making sure they learn. I sign on the line that they're not going to go to school, but I'm going to be the one that says they're not going to school. Because right now, we don't know where all those children are. And when you said you worry about that every night when you go to bed, well, every night when I go to bed, I worry about where they are too, because there's 50% less cases reported to DSS of child abuse and neglect. Well, let me tell you, some of those kids we haven't found have been abused and neglected. And so everybody can sit behind their mask and make a face when I say 10,000 children, but it's 10,000 children that you don't know where they are. Okay. Whoever wants to be next now.
I don't know if it's a question. I guess it's something that we need to think through or maybe accelerate. You've been thinking a lot. I think some districts have talked about alternative scheduling, and I know there's nonprofits and other groups who are thinking full day distancing sites, and parents are going to have to go to work, so they can't be there virtual all day. DSS licenses child care centers. I know that there are exemptions in a lot of areas, but we have to think through if there are all alternative schedules and kids go to some of these nonprofits and stuff, who's licensing, who's regulating, what does that look like? And the cost, right? Child care is not free. So who's picking up the cost of that? So those are things that we've been thinking about. We had that initial discussion with Department of Ed earlier this week, but we have to figure that out. I don't know if you guys that was ever talked about in those meetings or not, but that's something we have to start figuring out. So maybe I don't need a response. I'm just putting it out there.
I would just say that I know on our task force in Saluda, we included our local DSS and DHEC representatives so that we could have that engagement and certainly make those considerations. I would hope that these districts that are forming task forces are working with their local agencies.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Director Leach, did you want to make a report? I will go tell you that because we've gone on so long, we're going to save the other two that we have on here. We've talked with them, and one of them had to leave, and then we've talked with Quincy more about hers, and we're going to let Director Leach give his report if he wants to give a report.
Senator Sheila, I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has anything specific to DSS and a lot of the programs and changes and things that we have. I've kind of reported out a lot of the same stuff for the last few weeks, months, but I'm happy to answer any questions about anything that we might be doing around any of our program areas.
I think that y'all are doing a great job when we call on you, and we appreciate that.
That's what.
Okay, and
The chairman mentioned that there are less referrals now to DSS for abuse and neglect than you might expect during normal calendar years past. What are y'all doing about it? Are you making any special adjustments? Because I'd love to think that there are all these children, none of these children are getting abused and neglected, and that's why the reports are down. But we got to figure that the fact that they're not in school and they're not being seen by a lot of people is that nobody's seeing the marks on their body or nobody's seeing the blank look in their eyes that might generate a report ordinarily, and it's just they're not getting reported.
Yeah, I mean, early April we saw, which April across the country and in South Carolina, usually you would have your highest amount of child abuse and neglect referrals just based on its Child Abuse Prevention Month. And you see more kids usually entering the foster care system at that point in time. We saw a 55% decrease throughout that month and into May. Summer across the country, again in South Carolina, summer is usually low points anyway. We're actually, compared to a normal summer month, we're actually above at this point in time in referrals. So that's a positive. We're getting referrals. We know that, low referrals doesn't mean less abuse and neglect, right? Like you said. But less eyes are on children and youth across the state because school is out. So we put a lot of PSAs out. DHEC supported us in a 30-second PSA that was on Comcast Spectrum. We've had billboards across the state. We did work with Department of Education early on in making sure that if things were noticed to give us a call, same with DMH. We are continuing to even we do something in South Carolina that I think is something that is not done in other states, but screened out calls through the Child Abuse and Neglect also potentially go to our community-based prevention services. So even if maybe the caller or the information doesn't fully get at a case through our screening tool that says, hey, we need an investigation, there are some potential supports that still get to a family here in South Carolina that may not get in other states. So, we're trying to make sure that we're, responsive as much as possible with that. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions for Director Leach? Dr. Kay Phillips has a report she wanted to give.
Sorry. Thank you. Probably going to have to remove that just a second. Thank you, Madam Chairman. We as a CAC network, I'm one of the 17 Children's Advocacy Center directors in the state of South Carolina, and we as a network understand that there are currently estimated 10,000 children unaccounted for in South Carolina right now. And we understand that this issue was discussed at the subcommittee hearing yesterday. But we want you to know that we and the members of the JCLCC know that the Children's Advocacy Centers are incredibly concerned about what we will see when we find these children. The number of suspected child abuse cases has dramatically decreased to our CACs, to the centers, since the COVID shutdown, because teachers and school personnel are our primary abuse reporters. So there are not a lot of eyes on kids at this point in time. So we fully expect to find that many of these missing children have been locked up at home during this shutdown with the very people who may be abusing or neglecting them. And once schools reopen or once we find these children, we have no doubt that we're going to be overwhelmed with cases. And we are concerned about that. And of course, that is what we do. But I feel that it's incumbent on our organization to make this committee aware of the financial issues that we are facing when trying to do this work. So we currently have 17 centers around the state and 10 operational satellites, with other satellites in development to serve the entire state. We're a major referral source for many, many state agencies. So we're providing critical and essential services for law enforcement, child protective services, and state prosecutors in child abuse cases. However, most of our centers are 501c3 nonprofit organizations, and therefore depend on grants and donors and fundraising events in order to sustain our service provision to these state agencies who rely on us, and as well as to victims who are provided these critical and essential services at no cost to victims, families at all. So currently, we as a network of CACs are not included in a recurring part of the state budget. We did receive $170,000 of one-time funding from the state in the last 2 years. But because this year's budget has been funded thus far with a continuing resolution that includes only recurring funds, even our small amount of state funding is not going to be included for us. So we're currently one of only 12 states in the entire United States that doesn't provide recurring state funding for its CACs. And other than Georgia, we are the only state in the Southeast that does not provide funding for its CACs. Our CACs provided services to 10,690 children in 2019, and that was a 12% increase over 2018. And we know those numbers are going to explode once we find these missing children. And especially since we know that even under the best circumstances, the number of children who will be victims of sexual abuse each year is approximately 10%. And of course, the circumstances we're in right now are not ideal at all. I know that there's nothing that the JCLCC can do to fix this today, but I thought it was imperative to make you all aware, and certainly anything the legislative members of this committee can do to help us secure recurring state funding, or a small portion of the federal relief dollars that our sister state, North Carolina, provided, would be appreciated more than you know. Thank you. I appreciate you allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Phillips? Okay. Well, does anybody else on the committee have any words of wisdom they would like to share with us today? Would everybody like to go home? I would. Okay. Well, hearing no other business, I would say we're adjourned, and we will meet again when Amanda says so.